Between 1861 and 1865, the United States of America was engulfed in a conflict that would change it forever: the American Civil War, or War of Secession. It was an internal war, but of devastating proportions, so much so that it is considered one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 19th century. On one side, the northern states, loyal to the Union and the federal government based in Washington, fought. On the other, 11 southern states that, after declaring secession, formed a new independent entity, the Confederate States of America, with its capital in Richmond, Virginia. The causes of the conflict were deep and had matured over decades. At the heart of the conflict was the issue of slavery, but it was not just a moral issue. It was a knot that intertwined economics, ideology, politics, and power. The South based its prosperity on an agricultural system based on cotton, tobacco, and sugar plantations, which depended entirely on the labor of African slaves. The abolition of slavery would have meant, for the Southern elite, the end of an economic and social model. The North, on the other hand, was industrializing at a rapid pace. Its cities were growing, factories were multiplying, and a new entrepreneurial bourgeoisie was pushing for a capitalist economic model based on free and salaried labor. But it wasn't just about economics. Northern public opinion was increasingly hostile to slavery, also thanks to the spread of newspapers, novels like Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the action of abolitionists, active in many cities and Protestant churches. The differences turned into an irreparable rift. The turning point came in November 1860, with the election of Republican Abraham Lincoln to the presidency. Lincoln had never proposed the immediate abolition of slavery in the states where it was already legal, but he was firmly opposed to its expansion into the new Western territories. For many Southern leaders, his election was seen as an existential threat. Thus, between December 1860 and February 1861, 7 Southern states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, declared secession. 4 more joined in the following months. On April 12, 1861, Confederate troops opened fire on Fort Sumter, a Union base in Charleston Harbor. The attack marked the official start of the war. From that moment on, the United States became a huge battlefield. The two sides mobilized rapidly. The North, with a larger population, a developed industrial apparatus, and an extensive railroad network, had the logistical advantage. The South, on the other hand, had brilliant generals like Robert Lee, a deep fighting spirit and knowledge of the territory. The battles were hard and continuous. At Bull Run, just 30 kilometers from Washington, the Union suffered a first, humiliating defeat. Bloody battles followed, such as Antietam, the deadliest in a single day, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and, above all, Gettysburg in July 1863, considered the turning point of the war. It was a colossal battle, fought for 3 days in Pennsylvania, which ended with over 50,000 losses between dead, wounded, and missing. From that moment, the Confederacy entered a long phase of retreat. In the meantime, Lincoln had issued, on January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all slaves in the rebel territories free. Although it was not immediately effective from a practical point of view, the proclamation transformed the meaning of the war. It was no longer just a conflict for the unity of the nation, but a fight for freedom. Furthermore, it prevented European governments, particularly the United Kingdom and France, from supporting the Confederacy. In 1864, the Union gave overall command of its forces to Ulysses Grant, who adopted a strategy of attrition. That same year, General William Tecumseh Sherman led a devastating military campaign into the heart of the South. After capturing Atlanta, Sherman marched to the Atlantic Ocean, destroying infrastructure, railroads, and warehouses in an attempt to break the morale of the Southerners. This was the so-called March to the Sea, an example of total war that anticipated, in some ways, the conflicts of the 20th century. By April 1865, the exhausted Confederate Army was surrounded. On April 9th, General Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. It was the end of the war. A few days later, on April 14th, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater by a Southern sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth. The shock was enormous, just as the country was trying to pull itself together. The toll of the war was dramatic. Over 620,000 dead, an immense number for the time, not counting the wounded, the maimed, and the destroyed families. Entire cities were razed to the ground. The economies of the South collapsed. But the war also brought profound changes. Slavery was definitively abolished with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in December of 1865. Thus began the long period of Reconstruction, in which attempts were made, with varying successes and many failures, to reintegrate the former Confederate states and guarantee rights to former slaves. But the resistance of the South, racial violence, the rise of supremacist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, and the progressive disengagement of the North meant that true equality would remain a distant ideal for decades to come. The American Civil War was ultimately a conflict that marked the end of an era and the beginning of another. A nation divided by blood tried to mend itself. And even today, its wounds and questions resonate in American society between memory, identity, and civil rights.